It's February 15, 2021, and with Valentine's Day behind us, it's time to direct your love and affection where it might actually make a difference. The Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome to this 78th episode of Paperback Warrior. My name is Eric, and I'm here with my broadcast partner, Tom. Paperback Warrior is the internet's best resource for reviews and discussion of mid-20th century paperback fiction. We analyze literary works in the crime, adventure, western, spy, horror, and science fiction genres. We not only talk about these authors and books here on this very show, but we also offer new reviews nearly every day on the paperbackwarrior.com website. With that being said, let me bring on the other half of the show, my astute colleague, Tom. What's happening today?
All right, so we're mixing things up a little bit today with Eric bringing you today's feature. It's on a prolific author named Norman Daniels, who cut his teeth on the pulps before transitioning into paperbacks of the 1950s and 60s. I'm also going to be reviewing Toki Wedge #1, Nympho Lodge by Jack Lynn. Eric, what are you reviewing this week?
Today I'm going to be tying in our feature story with a book written by Norman Daniels called Killer Tank. It's a 1960s World War II novel that was originally called Strike Force.
Okay, now Eric, you texted me last week and said you had made a discovery of some sort in your own book collection. I'm not sure how this is possible, considering you literally work in your book library nearly every single day. So tell me this odd story, because I'm actually very curious what you're up to here.
I'll be happy to, but first, I want to ask you this strange question. You and I have rather large libraries of paperbacks, and I know for me it's a process to walk up to my library and sort of turn my head horizontally to browse for a book I want to read. And it's like shopping for a book that you already own, right? And Tom, have you ever experienced this odd thing where your eyes have already seen the same books so much over the years that you sort of skip sections of your own shelving? Like, automatically my eyes just skip over things that I haven't really picked before or just didn't have any interest in. So I'm kind of like on autopilot, and sometimes I'm like missing the forest because of all the trees. Does that make sense to you? Does that happen to you?
Well, regarding my eyes, after a lifetime of book hunting in shops, my eyes are really trained to look for certain spines in stores, right? Like the yellow faucet gold medals or the small publishers' logos on the spines. For instance, Pinnacle had two logos, one that looked like a target or a bullseye, and the other that had the letter P with the other letters of Pinnacle kind of rising diagonally upwards. I can spot those logos from 100 yards away. I can also recognize the desired thickness of a 180-page novel that publishers in the 1950s and 1960s felt was ideal for marketing purposes. Finally, I can also recognize the normal shelf wear that a book shows after 50 to 70 years of existence. Now, this superpower that I've been able to develop with my eyes is not going to land me a slot in the Avengers, but it makes it so I can scan a bookshelf pretty quickly, and the stuff I might find interesting will jump right out at to me. However, it also makes my own bookshelves a little tough to browse, and I think this is where you're going with this, because there are 4,000 paperbacks here that all trigger that same spot in my brain in the same way. And so I imagine it's sort of like the experience of being of working at the Victoria's Secret fashion show. It's just kind of sensory overload because you're just seeing stuff you like all the time, and it's hard to distinguish one from another. So I think that's probably where you're going with this, right?
Yeah. So, like, the weirdest thing, back last month on episode 75, I explained to you and the listeners that I've started bagging my books. And in doing so, my eyes can no longer just skip parts of my collection. I'm forced to, pull each book off and bag it. So I'm seeing these covers and the authors, and for some reason, unbeknownst to me, my eyes have been trained to skip over certain sections of books. And I found a section that's about 7 inches wide, and it features a bunch of tattered spines with different colors. And man, I just plain skip it each time I'm browsing. Well, Tom, I was forced to visit the 7-inch section of shelving. Guess what I found?
The world's smallest lost Ark of the Covenant?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
I'm out of guesses.
Okay. This entire section is a collection of tattered westerns with the author's name as Bradford Scott. I have so many Westerns that I don't read and I just never pay any attention to. So I apparently just skipped over these. But upon further inspection, some of these books have the same name, Walt Slade, written vertically on the left side of the front cover. Even more interesting is that nearly every cover features the overutilized face of Steve Holland, the model that was used for Doc Savage, the Buchanan series, and so forth. Tom, I brought this stack with me, and I'm passing them over to you to look at.
All right.
Do you own any of these or know anything about the author or the character?
All right, so looking over at my Western shelf here, I have, let me just grab these. All right. I have 3 Bradford Scott Westerns in my library, all apparently starring this character, Walt Slade. But I also don't know where I got them, and I know nothing about the author or the character. Like you, I didn't even know I owned them or that they existed until you just brought it up.
How about that? Well, there's 14 books in the stack I've just handed to you, and all of them were published by Pyramid in the mid-20th century. The first thing to know is that Bradford Scott was really an author named Alexander Leslie Scott. In the pulp magazine Thrilling Western, Scott created this character named Walt Slade. Now, Slade is the typical Western hero that can shoot straight and speak the truth. He's a Texas Ranger who's fighting outlaws, land barons, and all the vile villains one would expect for this era of Western writing. The covers normally say something like, "The Ranger Ace caught in a deadly range war," or "Crossfire," or "Train robbery." And Tom, believe it or not, this Walt Slade series lasted in paperback from 1956 through 1973.
Wow.
And that's like 80 total books. And of course the character appeared in numerous issues of Thrilling Western as well. Beginning in 2000, it looks like the character was brought to life again with 6 more books through 2016. And I'm not sure if these later novels are just reprints from the pulps or some unknown author using the Bradford Scott name to write more installments of the series. I don't know. Now, Leslie Scott also created the Western character Jim Hatfield for the pulps, and he used the name Jackson Cole to write them. And there's at least 55 total books in that series, with another author named Tom Curry who contributed installments to that series as well.
Okay, so I see, grabbing here, that I have one Jackson Cole book in my library called The Lobo Legion from 1950. I'm grabbing it here. Do you have this?
I do not.
Here, hold, you take this. Oh, shit.
It just fell apart.
Sorry. Literally.
No wonder you're handing it to me.
The pages fell out of the book. It's the cover. Yeah, so it's worth every cent I paid for it, I'm sure. It has 141 pages. The font is huge. I love a short book because I have commitment issues. So if you want that, you're welcome to it as you're building your collection of this guy's work.
Well, I have one as well, and it looks easily digestible. Now, on James Reasoner's Rough Edges blog, he provides the backstory on Alexander Scott. He apparently created this Jim Hatfield character in 1936 for the magazine Texas Rangers. Then in the early 1950s, Scott, like any other author of that time frame, branched off from the pulps to the paperback market. But he took the Jim Hatfield character with him, and he started writing Jim Hatfield novels for Pyramid Books. Some of these were rewrites of Hatfield novels from the Texas Rangers magazine. Now, Ned Pines, who's the head honcho, he was the top guy of the Thrilling group. Think of Pines as like the Vince McMahon of the wrestling business. That's what Pines was for the pulp publishing world. He's a pretty big deal. So he finds out that Scott had taken what would have been Thrilling's legal property, the character of Jim Hatfield, and sent him the proverbial cease and desist. So Scott changed the formula, and he started writing books starring Walt Slade. Apparently, Pines either didn't pursue the Walt Slade property, or he maybe reached some sort of agreement with Scott on the Walt Slade name. Also, Scott would later switch out the Jim Hatfield character and replace him with one named Jim Woodward. The end result is that there are more Walt Slade paperbacks than Jim Hatfield ones. And now I may not skip that section of my bookshelf any longer, because now I know what these books are and who wrote them. And I've got 14 of these freaking books. I'm going to choose one to read it later this year. I'm sure they're fun.
Yeah, they look fine. I mean, everything about them looks good. And at some point, let's reconcile your big stack with my 3 books, and you're welcome to take any of these books you want, because I don't know that I'll get to them before you will.
Do you have anything else to share before we move into the feature?
Yes, I actually got an odd package in the mail the other day, and it contained kind of an amazing gift from our friends at Stark House Press. Best of all, they included 2 of the same thing. So I take this as a hint that I should probably give you one of them. You have no idea what this is, do you?
I don't, and I love gifts.
All right, let me hand this over to you.
Oh, wow.
Okay, it's big.
Oh, jeez.
All right, tell the reader what I just handed you.
Look at that.
Tell them what it is.
So it's a big poster of the Best of Manhunt 1, the Best of Manhunt 2, the Manhunt Companion, which I'm not familiar with, and it has covers of the Manhunt magazines that were featured in these compilations.
It's like a giant collage of Manhunt magazine covers. So
it's freaking gorgeous.
Yeah, I need to find a place of honor here.
Oh, no doubt.
So, quick story. So, thank you to Greg Shepard at Stark House Books for this. If it was any other guy, I would claim that there's an ethical dilemma because we review so many books that Stark House ends up reprinting. But Greg knows that we always call the balls and strikes fairly. Quick story about him. And about kind of me when I was just getting started writing for Paperback Warrior. Stark House sent me a bunch of books to review when I first got started with writing for your website. And I was really excited to be getting free books, right, that I would otherwise have spent a fortune buying myself. And I started working my way through the books, and I was enjoying them and reviewing them for Paperback Warrior. And then I read a book that Stark House reprinted called The Longest Second by Bill S. Ballinger. He was a prolific writer and screenwriter with a good reputation. He lived from 1912 to 1980. He was probably best known for his Joaquin Hawks series of CIA spy adventures in the 1960s. Anyway, so several years ago, I read this standalone book by Bill Ballinger called The Longest Second. It was originally published in 1957, and I did not really like the book. It was about an amnesia victim named Vic Pacific who awakens in a hotel room recovering from a slit throat, who then now needs to figure out who he is and what his past was. I really didn't like this book at all, and it caused me this moral dilemma. See, in my mind, Stark House had been incredibly generous by providing me with this free book that would have cost $20 had I bought it. But there was no way that I could recommend this book in good conscience to our readers. So you're following this dilemma?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't even know that I told you I did this. I emailed Greg Shepard at Stark House, and I was honest about the situation. I told him that I could not give this book a good review. And I told him that if he wanted, I would split the difference with him and just not review it at all, because I wanted to preserve the relationship between Paperback Warrior and Stark House. Now, in retrospect, I should not have made him that offer, but I was new to all this, but that was the deal I offer him. And do you know what he said?
No, what?
Okay, he said that he's been in the book business a long time and never worries about that stuff. He encouraged me to be honest in my reviews and print what I want. I just feel that was just such an incredibly professional way to handle it from him.
I agree, and I guess the old saying is all press is good press, right?
I suppose, yeah. So anyway, I wrote my review, and you can read it on paperbackwarrior.com. It wasn't petty or bitchy or snarky. I was constructive in my criticism. I don't know if my review hurt his sales, but Stark House is still going strong, and I now have this poster to show for it. Eric, have you ever felt bad about giving a book a bad review or been tempted to spike a review because you actually have good feelings about the author or the publisher?
Not really. I think we had a situation kind of similar to this with a book called The Enforcer by Ovid Damaris. And man, I ripped that book to shreds. And I can't remember, but I may have even put it in the Hall of Shame. Now, Lee Goldberg of Cutting Edge Books reprinted the book a few months later for his Cutting Edge imprint. But we didn't pull or change that review or anything like that. And Goldberg felt the same way as Greg. You just review it, just provide an honest appraisal. I mean, I didn't write the book, so I legitimately have no skin in the game other than being a consumer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the listener can be comfortable that at no time would our reviews ever be swayed by the fact that whether we buy the book or get it for free. At this point, we've kind of gained enough credibility and popularity that we don't need to make sweet, sweet love to these publishers. They're going to, they can't keep their books from us. And it's not like the books are all that expensive. So, and looking around the room here at the 4,000 paperbacks, we're never going to run out of content to review.
I used to write for MaximumMetal.com, and I still do a little bit. And they have a promo portal that you log into with your credentials. and I still have access to all the new releases that come out 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And I've told them, I said, hey, I'm not reviewing anymore, so you can cut me off if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point in me continuing on to get access to all these freebies. But I guess because I've worked so long for them with reviewing their stuff, they're just like, hey, we don't care. If you want to enjoy it.
I think they feel that you're probably kind of an influencer in the world of heavy metal music, and whether you're publishing something or not, you know people and you chit-chat, and you may have a friend who will say, hey, what's good out there? And you'll spread the word if something's particularly good in the world of heavy metal music. And that to them is worth nearly as much as your ability to actually publish a review for your now defunct website.
Before the car manufacturers came up with the horrible idea of lowering your car volume at stoplights, we used to be able to blast heavy metal at stoplights, and everybody would hear it within a 3-block radius.
Right, and
Can't do it anymore.
They would know not to hire you for any jobs in that town.
Can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, why don't we hit him with the feature music and then pull the curtain on this dude named Norman Daniels.
Yeah, play it.
Okay, today's feature is going to be a deep, deep dive into an author that really has dabbled in just about every type of literary fiction that exists. That guy is Norman Daniels, whose real name was Norman Danberg. What makes him so unique is that he really speaks to not only the pulp fans of the 1930s and 1940s, but also crime noir and spy novels of the 50s and 60s, and even science fiction, gothic horror, romance, and medical fiction. With that sort of output over the years, I thought it might be best to divide up his life and career into 2 sections, starting with his birth through the 1930s and 40s. So Norman Danberg was born in 1905 in Connecticut. He attended both Columbia and Northwestern University. From my research, I couldn't garner what his studies were or if he graduated. One would assume that he did. When Daniels turned 26, he married Dorothy Daniels. Tom, we're going to place a pin beside Dorothy Daniels' name because we're going to revisit her name in just a little while.
So noted.
Daniels' first published story was The Death House Murder, which appeared in Detective Dragnet magazine in 1932. That same year, he saw his work in magazines like The Shadow Detective Monthly, All Detective Magazine, and Gangster Stories. The December 1933 issue of Thrilling Detective featured a story called Cold Steel. This was an important moment for Daniels because it secured a relationship with the pulp powerhouse Standard, which was owned by Ned Pines. They produced a ton of titles in the 1930s and 1940s and competed with the equally productive publisher Street and Smith. Daniels was asked by Standard to pen stories starring their pulp hero, the Phantom Detective. From my research, it shows that he wrote over 30 installments of that series. After a little bit of a downward curve in pulp sales, the publisher began to think of new ways to gain readers. The idea was to create new heroes. Norman Daniels came up with the idea of the Black Bat character and placed him in Black Book Detective magazine in July of 1939. Tom, I had some extra Amazon Christmas money, and I ordered a trade paperback called The Black Bat Archives, Volume 1, by Thrilling Publications. It's from 2017 and features the first 3 Black Bat stories. So I started with the origin, which was called Brand of the Black Bat. In that story, a district attorney named Tony Quinn is trying to convict a notorious criminal named Snate. In the opening pages, Quinn actually befriends a burglar named Silk, and together the two of them kill this would-be assassin that was sent by Snate. Later, during Snate's trial, his goons create chaos in the courtroom by killing this key witness. During the violence, Quinn is splashed with a deadly acid that not only blinds him, but also permanently disfigures his face. Days later, a mysterious woman appears with instructions for Quinn to visit a rural doctor who can perform an unusual surgery. Post-op, Quinn finds that not only can he see, but that his vision is nearly telescopic. He can shoot with pinpoint accuracy, and he can see in the dark. By donning a black mask and cape, he deems himself the nighttime vigilante, the Black Bat. And like so many of these pulp heroes, he creates this crime-fighting team while still maintaining a daytime job as the blind and wealthy Tony Quinn.
Pardon the interruption, Eric. But isn't this Black Bat just ripping off the DC Comics Batman? It sounds like Quinn is basically Bruce Wayne.
Great question, and this is one that's been debated for decades by fans. Both publishers claim they had the idea first, but mostly the two titles were released around the same time and just happened to share similar ideas. I will say that Tony Quinn's origin tale of the acid and disfigurement was probably heavily borrowed by the Batman writers when they introduced the villain Two-Face. But that's a whole other argument that we don't have time for today.
Yeah.
Not only did Daniels create the Black Bat, but he also had a hand in writing, if not outright creating, a slew of other titles like Dan Fowler G-Man, The Crimson Mask, The Eagle, The Candid Camera Kid, Captain Danger, The Masked Rider, as well as also writing for the rival Street and Smith publisher with their pulps like The Avenger, Crime Busters, Doc Savage, The Feds, and the wildly popular Shadow magazine. Like the Black Bat, I also purchased The Masked Detective Archives, Volume 1, published by Thrilling Productions in 2017. It features the first 3 masked detective stories. These were launched under their own magazine called Masked Detective, beginning in 1940. I had the opportunity to read the first of the series, which was called Alias the Masked Detective, and I thought it was as good as the Black Bat stuff. In this first Masked Detective story, Daniels introduces a young crime reporter named Rex Parker. Now, Parker isn't this rich guy or a scarred guy or anything like that. He's really just an average Joe, other than one important element. He's a master martial artist. Now, his friend is a columnist named Winnie Bly, and she convinces him that he should use his martial arts to fight crime. So with some makeup and a mask over his eyes, Parker becomes the masked detective. And guess what? No one knows his true identity, except Winnie, and a homicide detective named Dan Gleason. And this first story was a fairly violent and edgy one, where some of the city's professors and art aficionados are being brutally gunned down by a criminal named Carlson. It's up to Parker, Bly, and Gleason to capture the crook. The story was really fast-paced, and overall I really enjoyed it. Norman Daniels was really busy in the 1940s. He was writing shorts for the likes of Romantic Range, Army-Navy Flying Stories, Popular Detective, G-Men Detective, Sky Fighters, Crack Detective Stories, and the list just goes on and on and on. Tom, you had the opportunity to read some of his shorts. Tell us about one that you read.
Yeah, it was weird. I found this website called Pulp Fiction Bookstore. Their website URL is odd. It's www.pulpfictionbook.store. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I guess it's a thing. Anyway, they sell tons of stories and novels from the pulps as ebooks that you can sideload into your Kindle, but none of these reprints are on Amazon. So you need to buy the books from the store's website, then you download the Mobi or EPUB files, and then sideload it into your e-reader, like your Kindle. You have to do that yourself. They have a ton of Norman Daniels short story compilations as ebooks for really cheap. So I grabbed one called Married to Murder, originally from the 1949 issue of Popular Detective magazine, and man, it was great. The main character suspects that his new wife recently murdered his brother so that they, as a couple, could control the family estate. Whoever killed the brother did it by pushing him in his wheelchair off a cliff.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's some really good action set pieces kind of shoehorned into what's basically a whodunit mystery. And it was a fantastic way to kill an hour. It made me really want to read a lot more Norman Daniels. The story, again, is called Married to Murder, and the easiest way to get it is probably from this Pulp Fiction bookstore online.
Well, now that we're finished with Daniels' 1930s and 1940s work, the second half follows a familiar trend. The birth of the paperback in the 1950s would be a welcome mat for Daniels to increase his productivity. Using a variety of pseudonyms, Daniels went to work on creating a number of full-length original novels that appear in paperback format. While he was writing for this new format, he continued to write shorts for the magazine in pulps like Western Romance and Mystery Detective. But his paperback output really flourished at this time. Under the pseudonym of Mark Reed, he wrote sleazy books for publishers like Falcon and Rainbow, stuff like Street of Dark Desires, The Nude Stranger,
Ooh, nude.
Sins of the Flesh, and House of 1,000 Desires. You get the idea.
I can't think of 1,000 desires without a menu in front of me.
Most of these books are highly sought after and really expensive. As David Wade, Daniels wrote at least 6 books. Come Night, Come Desire for the publisher Ecstasy, Raise the Devil for publisher Falcon, She Walks by Night, Bedroom with a View, Only Human, and Walk the Evil Street, which were all published by Rainbow. My thoughtful wife gifted me 1952's Walk the Evil Street last year as a Berkeley Diamond paperback, and I really enjoyed it, and here's my short capsule. Andy Mason is a former U.S. Army vet now turned reporter. After a number of exposés on drug addiction, Mason gains the attention of a former racketeer named Sam. Sam, who's now confined to his deathbed, offers Mason this really cool proposal. He wants Mason to wing his daughter Joyce off of heroin. If he can succeed, Sam will give Mason a series of diaries outlining all of his criminal activities in the 1930s and 40s, as well as names featured in his criminal network. Now, being this hard-nosed reporter, Mason jumps at the opportunity. But the problem is that Sam isn't fully forthcoming on what the job really entails. I thought Daniels had a great story here, and I loved his characterization. It's a little muddy in the middle, but the end was a great payoff. I think it's worth pursuing.
Give me the title one more time.
It's Walk the Evil Street, and you'll find it under Norma Daniels' pseudonym of David Wade.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Under the name Norma Dunn, he wrote Little Lynn, Shack Girl, The Twist, and Another Man in Your Life for both Falcon and Rainbow publishers. Under his real name of Norman Daniels, kind of, sort of, he produced novels like Mistress on a Deathbed, Sweet Savage, and Bedroom in Hell, again for Falcon and Rainbow. While writing a lot of 1950s paperbacks, Daniels also began receiving some great paychecks out of Hollywood. You see, Daniels also wrote television scripts. According to IMDb, Daniels penned scripts for shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Sugarfoot, Colt 45, Zane Grey Theater, Ford Theater, GE Theater, among others. As the 1950s closed out, Daniels began writing for the publisher Avon. In 1959, Avon published his 2 paperbacks, The Deadly Game and The Captive. A year later, in 1960, they published his novels Lady for Sale, Lover, Let Me Live, and Some Die Running. Now, last year I read The Captive, and man, I thought it was really good. On the PaperbackWarrior.com review, I describe it as a violent crime yarn from cover to cover. It stars a World War II veteran who inherits his dead uncle's hotels. But after taking ownership, he learns that all these hotels are actually illegal brothels, and they're gambling holes controlled by the syndicate. The book's premise has the hero battling the hardened criminals to win back the hotels with no criminal strings attached. I loved it, and I think you will too, and the book actually has received new life thanks to Lee Goldberg's cutting-edge books. It's really high quality at a low price. In the 1960s, Daniels incorporated television novelizations and tie-ins into his repertoire with books based on shows like Arrest and Trial, Sam Benedict, The Smith Family, Chase, The Detectives, Ben Casey, Dr. Kildare, The Avengers, and so forth. Also in the 1960s, Daniels created an 8-book spy series called The Man from Ape, that's Man from APE, starring a secret agent named John Keith. That series ran from 1964 to 1971 and was published by Pyramid. I read the first book in that series called Overkill. If you love Nick Carter Killmaster and titles like that, I think that you'll enjoy the series. The idea for this APE organization, which stands for American Policy Executive, is that it's an ultra-secret organization that most of the government agencies don't even know exist. APE has operatives all over the globe that assist in fighting communists, terrorists, and criminal enterprises. It's basically the U.S. versus China and Russia. Overkill is a great starting point, and it introduces the character and the idea of the series. You can still pick those books up fairly cheap. Daniels also wrote a 2-book series of spy novels starring a CIA agent named Bruce Barron. These were The Baron of Hong Kong from 1967 and Barron's Mission to Peking from 1968. Both were printed by Lancer. He also did another spy novel called Spy Hunt, which was published by Pyramid in 1960. He wrote for a number of other publishers in the 1960s that sort of fit that action-adventure, steamy crime noir, World War II vigilante kind of pattern. The Kono Diamond for Berkeley, Suddenly by Shotgun, and Something Burning by Fawcett Gold Medal. He wrote the World War II novel Moments of Glory, which was published in 1965 by Paperback Library, as well as another war novel called Battalion, published by Pyramid in 1965. In 1965, he also saw his World War II tank adventure Strike Force, published by Lancer. It was later reprinted by Magnum with a different cover and the title of Killer Tank. I'm going to be reviewing that novel to wrap up this episode a little later. Daniels also wrote another short series starring a California police chief named Kelly Carvel. These books were The Rape of a Town in 1970, followed by One Angry Man in 1971, and concluding with License to Kill in 1972. I had the opportunity to read The Rape of a Town and thought it was a really cool premise for a series. The book introduces Carvel as this former Los Angeles police captain who quit the force due to the city's flawed justice system. Carvel is invited to a swanky Beverly Hills party hoping to find his next career. The host is this beautiful woman who knows Carvel's background in law enforcement. She introduces him to a network consisting of U.S. senators, police chiefs, attorneys, and these other high-ranking officials that work together to right the wrongs of the legal justice system. Some of this work will be illegal, bordering on making the parties criminals themselves. But by doing this sort of vigilante justice, it also allows Carvel and others to determine what exactly went wrong with the justice system and how to correct it in the future. The Rape of a Town also introduces Carvel to his first assignment, which is becoming the police chief in a Northern California town called Vineland. The town is so corrupt that most of the force quits when Carvel arrives. Most of the book's narrative is set during a 4th of July celebration when Carvel must battle an entire army of criminals who are robbing the town while everyone's out celebrating. The fireworks mask the gunshots. I thought the book was just okay, but I liked it enough to want to pursue the other installments in the trilogy. Daniels also got into the medical thriller and hospital romance books. He authored titles like The Surgeon, Savage Heart, Jennifer James R.N., Stanton Bishop M.D., and The Tarnished Scalpel. In the 1970s, Norman Daniels began delving into the Gothics genre. You remember those old paperbacks with the beautiful woman running from the big Victorian mansion?
Yes, I always want to know, what is she running from? What's happening in that building that's making her so scared?
Yeah, it's crazy that they all use that same theme, but
Yeah.
Daniels wrote a ton of them under the name Angela Gray. These were also on Lancer, but were with other publishers as well, like Pocket Books. Some title names were The Ashes of Falconwick, Ravenswood Hall, Watcher in the Dark, and The Warlock's Daughter. He also wrote them under the name Suzanne Summers, and that Summers is S-O-M-E-R-S, not the actress.
He also starred in Three's Company.
Three's Company, and made The Thigh Master. These were published by Tower and had titles like Mist of Morning, Until Death, The House on Thunder Hill, and House of Eve. He also used the name Cynthia Cavanaugh to pen Gothic romances for Pyramid, books like The Deception and Bride of Lenore. He also wrote at least one under the name Geraldine Thayer. I believe it was called The Dark Rider. Another for Warner Books was also called Voodoo Slave. Now, Daniels even cashed in on the success of the Southern Plantation novels, books like Law with a Lash for Lancer and Slave Rebellion for Belmont Tower.
I'm all about those books.
As you can see, Daniels was really, really prolific, but at the same time, he knew the paperback trends and pop culture. Tom, Norman Daniels wrote what was popular. If Gothics were hot, he wrote Gothics. When James Bond was blowing up cinema, he wrote spy fiction. With the success of The Guns of Navarone, Daniels wrote military fiction. When hospital and doctor shows became the rage, the author wrote medical romance thrillers. It all fits a pattern that he always surfed the popularity wave. That doesn't necessarily make him a hack. He's still original with clever plots and stories, but he was a marketing genius to know when to use these ideas at the right time.
It was very opportunistic, it sounded like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, before I close out the feature, I want to circle way back to the name Dorothy Daniels. We put a pin in that earlier, and she remains a very important part of the Norman Daniels story. I mentioned in the feature's beginning that Norman Daniels was married to Dorothy Daniels. Dorothy was a talented writer who was very prolific in the romance and Gothic genre. It would be hard to browse any of those genres and not find her name somewhere. She started her career writing romance shorts and incorporating medical fiction into the stories. After the sales declined, Daniels, or her agent, suggested that she transcend into the red-hot market of Gothic novels. So she wrote her first one, Shadow Glen, which was published in 1965. She would go on to write a slew of novels, including titles like Dark Island, The Stone House, Ghost Song, House on Circus Hill, Diablo Manor, House of Many Doors. You get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
From 1965 through 1975, she had collected sales figures of over 10 million copies, and more than 150 titles were in print. That's astounding.
I think she was probably more commercially successful than he was.
I don't know. That's
a lot of books.
It's a lot of books.
Yeah.
Knowing the two of them are in their house pounding out the literature, there's no doubt that the two collaborated on each other's books. In fact, Norman Daniels wrote some of these Gothic novels under his wife's name. Dorothy would type her husband's manuscripts and even edit them. They also collaborated on the television scripts as well. They were a powerhouse team that probably made some serious bank back in the day. And it's hard to even imagine how much Norman or Dorothy participated in each other's plot outlines, story ideas, titles, and writing. They were probably interchangeable, I would imagine. In closing, Norman Daniels died in Camarillo, California in 1995. Much of his literary work, journals, notes, manuscripts, were all donated to Bowling Green University, where they remain available for anyone wishing to browse the author's work. Dorothy Daniels passed away in 2001. If you're shopping for Norman Daniels' work, look for some of his many pseudonyms like Suzanne Summers, Geraldine Thayer, Angela Gray, Cynthia Cavanaugh, Richard Bridges, Norma Daniels, Grant Dell, A.R. Flagstaff, Savin Lelson, Frank Johnston, Robert Marks, David Norman, Kirk Rand, Mark Reed, Judd Talley, Lee Humanize, Louis Falk, I'm almost done, Peter Reed, Lawrence Victor, John Benton, Jerry Wade, David Wade, Waylon Rice, Kenneth Robeson, and G. Wayman Jones. Tom, wouldn't you like our superfan list to be this long?
Wow, yeah, that would be great. I mean, I still can't get over how prolific this guy was. A couple questions. Did his wife, did he ever change his name legally to Norman Daniels, or was he Norman Danberg and Daniels was the sole pseudonym? Where I'm going with this is the wife was also writing under the Daniels name as well.
I think his obituary was Norman Daniels.
Interesting.
So
he may have legally changed his name at some point from Danberg to Daniels. I wonder, and I hate to even bring this up, like you got Norman Danberg writing as Norman Daniels. You got Peter Rabinowitz writing as Peter Rabe. Were these guys, did they feel that their Jewishness would somehow affect their commercial success?
Yeah, I never really thought about that.
I mean, you hate to think that. I mean, it's the last thing on my mind when I pick up a book. I don't give a darn what someone's religion is.
Back then.
But I just wonder, if there was a prejudice against Jewish people back in the 1950s where authors who had clearly Jewish ethnic names would dumb down their names.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly a thing back then.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Next question was ebooks. Doesn't sound like a whole lot of Norman Daniels have been reprinted. I mean, with the exception of one or two books by that our friend Lee Goldberg is reprinting. It doesn't sound like his stuff has been resurrected at all.
No, and I wonder. Maybe you should ask Greg at Starkhouse if he's ever delved into that estate and what the deal is with it, because I think that's a lot of books. That's a lot of publishers, though.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what deals he reached with them, but it's incumbent upon the author to renew the copyright after a certain date, or else it slips into public domain after a while. And so, which I'm sure is how that Pulp Fiction library that I found online is reprinting the old books. I'm sure they're just public domain. But it's just crazy that this guy was so productive and so prolific, and yet there's only like one or two of his books still in print.
I know. Yeah, he's not like a Bruno Fisher or something that did a lot of pulp stuff and then he's been reprinted. This guy just largely just forgotten,
except for here, right?
Yeah, except for here. Thanks to the following sites for assistance in researching the author: Mystery File, Pulp Fest, Encyclopedia.com, and IMDb. And before I jump over to my review of Killer Tank, you've got a review for us.
Okay, so odds are you probably don't remember the Toki Wedge series. He was the star of about 22 sexy paperback mysteries between 1959 and 1965, published by a Chicago-based company called Novel Books. The Paperback house was ostensibly a sleaze publisher, but it seemed that they were often punching above their weight and putting out books way better than they had to for the market. The author of the Toki Wedge books was Jack Lynn, and that was just his pen name for a writer named Max Vanderveer, who authored the series of books starring this very short private eye named Toki Wedge. There's this new reprint house I told you about at our Christmas shopping episode last year called Grizzly Pulp, who's been reprinting the Toki Wedge books as mass-market paperbacks, and they're printing them on wood pulp paper, beginning with this first installment, Nympho Lodge, published in 1959. So the Toki Wedge books are very lighthearted, but he's still a hard-boiled private detective. They don't take themselves too seriously. Toki himself is 5 foot 6 inches tall and 140 pounds. I would say that the narration and plotting reminds me a lot of Richard Prather's Shel Scott books. In this case, Toki is hired as a bodyguard for a wealthy woman named Janice, who's going through an ugly divorce and receiving cryptic, threatening letters. The divorcing couple lives at a resort they co-own called the Wagon Wheel. Toki moves into the resort so he can be closer to his client and determine who, if anyone, is trying to kill her. Now, at the lodge, we quickly meet a cast of nymphos. To be fair, it's not clear that any of them have been clinically diagnosed with nymphomania, but every woman Toki encounters at the lodge is beautiful, stacked, and hot to trot. To answer the question on everyone's mind, this is not a porno novel. The paperback is way sexier than most 1959 crime paperbacks, but nowhere close to graphic or explicit by today's standards. Amid all of the sexual innuendo, there's actually a very decent mystery to be solved at the Nympho Lodge, and Toki proves himself to be a competent, funny, and very tough private detective. At times, the book felt a little bit to me like a dirty Agatha Christie book, when there's a group of people in a lodge getting killed off one by one, while our intrepid investigator gets laid a lot and then tries to solve the mystery on who's doing all this killing. For comparison purposes, I actually enjoyed spending 174 big font pages with Toki Wedge far more than I've ever liked a Shel Scott paperback. Nympho Lodge is not a mystery masterpiece, but it's definitely just a lot of sexy fun. This company, Grizzly Pulp, did a marvelous job of packing the physical product of this paperback. The pulp paper that they printed it on is very soft and readable. The novel comes with a removable black cover masking the lusty sleaze art, so you can read this on a crowded city bus without getting side-eye from the squares on the bus with you. My only criticism is that there were a lot of line break errors in the text and a lot of other typos. It's nothing that stopped me from enjoying the story, but the Grizzly Pulp proofreader should not rely solely on the optical character recognition programs to do the work for him. Mostly I'm just really thrilled that this enterprising grassroots publisher has brought Toki Wedge back to life. It's a fun series, and it really deserves a second chance at building a readership. I can totally recommend it. Interestingly, you can't get it on Amazon. It's not available as an ebook. You have to buy it at the Grizzly Pulp website, which is www.grizzlypulp.com. So, Eric, why don't you go ahead?
All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to try to go through this fast. I'm finishing this episode up with a review of Norma Daniels' novel Strike Force. It was originally published in 1965 by Lancer and then reprinted again by Magnum under the title Killer Tank. The book is set in Germany during World War II. A tank task force is set up to penetrate into Germany as a mobile strike force. The idea is that the tanks will slip over the border during a diversion set up by planes, tanks, and troops. This mobile tank force is assigned to a Colonel Hagen and Sergeant Dixon. The two will orchestrate hit-and-run attacks on German forces, towns, bases, and airstrips. By disguising the tanks as German and using old, overgrown roads, the force plans on creating as much undetected destruction as possible. The problem with the strategy is that Hagen and Dixon really, really hate each other. Daniels teases a backstory between these two characters for much of the novel's first 100 pages. There's plenty of action as the tank force engages the enemy, but the real interesting aspect of the narrative is this mysterious past that Hagen and Dixon have with each other. When Hagen meets a beautiful French woman, Dixon becomes hell-bent on destroying Hagen's happiness. With a focus on character development and a thick tension between Dixon and Hagen, Killer Tank serves as a hybrid of World War II and crime-noir storytelling. I wasn't necessarily bored with the plotting and pace, but I will say that Daniels never really fully commits to either genre. When I wanted a more serious action novel, the story slowed to a conversational tone. When I needed the characters to come to blows, the military action consumed the story. I couldn't quite walk the high beam that Norman Daniels had built for his reader. The balancing act just didn't work for me, but nevertheless, Killer Tank is an entertaining read that probably could have been improved with a few precise touch-ups to the storytelling. You're not going to hate it, but I'm not sure how necessary this paperback really is. There's just far better crime noir books out there, and for that matter, there's also a lot of great World War II books out there. So this one you may want to just skip over. But Tom, why don't you wrap us up?
Okay, let's let these folks get out of their car and get off to work. Plus, you and I need to start preparing next week's episode. So with that, we are closing out another episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. Please join us at paperbackwarrior.com to read our reviews every day. If you want to support the show financially, you can donate using the PayPal link in the upper right-hand corner of the desktop version of the website. You can also follow us on Facebook to join the conversation. On behalf of Eric, this is Tom saying be cool, and we will see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.